They're camping inside the building. They're in a right outside of left.
Fuck!
Yep, that guy.
Shut up, Bradford. What's up, guys? Khaos here. Well, I said in the last video that I'm going to be breaking down Operation Metro step by step on how to win. It's a bit more complicated than you might think. Most of you are thinking it's just whoever can spam the most grenades, but that doesn't work if you're in a non-explosive server, which a lot of Metro maps are. But a lot of people really don't know how to take B flag. They think if they rush one point, they'll capture the B flag, or if they rush a particular point, they'll capture a B flag. But that's not the case. I've played a lot of Metro in the last couple of years between Battlefield 3 all the way through Battlefield 4, and I've noticed the same pattern in both. But it seems like not a lot of people catch on to what that pattern is. So I hope to break it down in this video and help you to understand what it is that makes Operation Metro tick, and if you want, how to actually win the game. Now we're going to start with this map that you see here. This is surrounding the B flag, the most important clusterfuck of them all. And it's broken down into 4 zones. Zone 1 is the staircase lockers. Zone 2 is the front escalators and the elevators. Zone 3 is that little side ramp on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, depending on which team you spawn. And 4 is the rear escalators. Now, I broke these down into 1 through 4 based on the priority in which they need to be captured. You have to control 3 of those 4 zones in order to actually possess B flag. And if you don't properly control 3 of the 4 zones, you're going to be dealing with a heavily contested flag, and that's when probably some of the most fun gameplay takes place. But those are the 4 zones. Now, breaking it down even further, in order for the Russians to control the zone, I've kind of given you a layout of where people need to be on the map. Ignore the U.S. team that you already see on there and the little red Doritos. Those aren't what's important. What's important is the little red dots that I've placed on there. If you're the Russians, you need to have guys in these areas to help control the map. And you can see they're broken down into zones 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the reason for that is those are the important zones. You got to control the staircase for 1. Don't sit in the lockers and camp. You're never going to get anywhere. They can rush the lockers, they can kill you, and they can secure zone 1, which is step 1, and the U.S. taking back control of B. So you want to push out of the lockers and start driving the enemy down that staircase. You also want to push up to the elevators and the front escalators. You want to be in that area. You don't want to be on top of B flag. That's not controlling zone 2. You have to be up in front of the elevators and by the escalators to control it, killing anyone who comes up the escalators. You also want to push down that side ramp. If you push them down into the subway, if you control zones 1, 2, and 3, essentially the entire enemy team has no visual on B flag. And if they don't have a visual on it, it becomes much harder for them to get pressure and take it. So you have to push them all the way back down into the subway. Zone 4, essentially it's less important. It can be covered by a couple of snipers who are helping to put some fire down into zone 2. But for the most part, they're just making sure that you don't get the random runners that go taking off to Alpha. Now, as far as what you need to do, control 3 of those 4 zones. If you're the US, still, it's a very similar situation. If you want to take B, you have to push up past that staircase. You have to push the enemy down into the lockers and start driving them out of lockers. You need to push up the escalators and control the area around the elevators. That's an important location because you can get immediate flag burn by getting into zone 2 right next to the elevators immediately, and that puts more pressure on the enemy, and that forces them to react to what you're doing. Far too often, sometimes the enemy will just retreat, sometimes they come rushing up, which is why it's important to control both Zone 1 and Zone 2, because if you control Zone 1, they can kind of help prevent the enemy from charging you up there at the elevators. And if you control Zone 3, which you see by those little blue dots that I've placed over there by the ramp and that little office, then you really stop them dead cold from rushing Zone 2, and you've pretty much controlled the rest of that area in and around the B flag. So that is a very key thing. Now I do have a few examples showing you the map, the immediate map of Russians and the U.S. who are properly controlling B flag, and you'll see that for the most part they're pushed up into the exact same areas that I just showed you. And it's controlling those areas that's key. Far too often, though, a lot of people don't really pay attention to that. They get tunnel vision, ironically enough, in Metro, and they don't see what's happening beyond just their immediate area. So oftentimes players don't realize, okay, yeah, I'm in lockers, but what else is going on that's helping us to control the B flag? And that tends to be a problem, because if you don't know what's helping you to control B flag, in theory you can't technically properly defend B flag, and you're very limited in how you attack it. That's why a lot of people, they just know about the staircase. So most people go to the lockers and the staircase. That side of the map is the most heavily contested, but because it's so heavily contested, anyone inside those locations don't realize there's a whole nother battle going on the remaining 2/3 of the B flag. And if you go into a match and you're facing people who are truly just kicking your ass, well, odds are you're probably not going to have much success anywhere else, because you don't know what to do with the other locations, and that's why I'm making this video. So those examples that I put up on your screen for both the Russians and the US, if you can kind of duplicate that, it'll work. But ultimately, those 4 zones, it breaks down into simply control 3 of the 4 zones, and by doing so, that 4th zone that you don't control is completely surrounded, and once it's completely surrounded, you win B flag. You'll eventually work them out of that area. Now, what I'm putting up on your screen now is an example of why I've prioritized these zones the way I did. If you control the staircase as the US side, look at your field of fire that you have on the remainder of the map. You're immediately providing support to Zone 2. You're helping to clear that out. You're also providing support over towards the ramp and helping to thin that out. And if you're thinning out both those locations, you're making both those locations easier to take for your teammates, which is huge. Here's a great example of why, if you're the Russians, you need to push out of the lockers. Look at that tiny area that you cover by comparison. If you don't drive them down the staircase, you're making it harder for the rest of your team to maintain control of B flag. I know you don't want to skin your knee on the playground, but grow a pair, push out of the lockers, and help your teammates out. Now, the 2 most important areas of sitting in lockers is actually those 2 small areas, because that's the primary route that enemies are going to take from the staircase, and it's also getting a little bit of fire into Zone 2, which helps them out very little. It would help out people in Zone 2 a lot more if you push out of lockers and you drive the enemies down the staircase. If you're in Zone 2, this is your field of fire. You get additional firepower into the staircase. You're helping out the guys in lockers by keeping them suppressed over on the stairs. You're also making sure no one comes up that front escalator. And worst case scenario, if somebody flanks you via the 3rd zone, that side ramp, you can technically get some fire up there as well. But for the most part, if you're in front of the elevators, your primary focus is what's going on directly in front of you. Now, if you were on the US side, this is your field of fire from Zone 2. In a similar fashion to the US controlling the staircase, controlling the elevator area gives you a tremendous field of fire. It helps you, if you have that area, you can provide supporting fire to the staircase. You can help clear out any enemies that are there. Additionally, you have pretty good coverage from that side of the map of the rest of B flag. You get some supporting fire to thin out the herd over in Zone 3, as well as you start helping to clear out just a few guys from lockers. It's not going to be that big of a deal, but you can still help, if nothing else, distract the enemy and make them not want to push up and provide reinforcements in lockers. So it's, in my opinion, a little less important than controlling the staircase, but it's still right up there, almost a dead heat tie between the stairs and the elevators for control of the map. And that's why those are prioritized 1 and 2. Now here's where it starts to get a little fun. Zone 3. If you control that ramp as the Russians and you push the enemy all the way down the ramp back into the subway, and you actually start pushing into the subway yourself, It doesn't look like it's that big of an area, but it's a big deal because you're pretty much cutting off anybody from going to the rear escalators. You're also getting some additional firepower down inside the subways, preventing people from getting up inside Zone 2. Not to mention, if anybody wants to try to sneak in through the elevators, well, once again, you have a lot of firepower that can go inside that little elevator lobby. So it's a very key factor to make sure you push down that ramp into the tunnel, and that way you can assist primarily Zone 2 in this. But again, if you control Zone 1 and you control Zone 2 by pushing down that ramp into the subway itself, you're pretty much ensuring that Zone 2 doesn't have as much to worry about. And if they don't have as much to worry about, that's when you actually start driving them all the way back down into the subway as a whole. That's why that's the third rank. And if you control the ramp as the US, but you don't push out, you actually cover a very small area of the map. You're not really helping out anybody by that little sliver. You're kind of maybe getting some firepower on some guys in Zone 4, maybe taking out a couple guys on the near lockers who are helping to shoot up the elevators pretty good, but for the most part you're being useless. This next map shows what happens when you push out of the ramp and into that little office space. You get a massive area over the map. Now, the reason this is prioritized 3 instead of 1, because by area it's by far the largest area, is because it's also probably the most difficult to get to unless you are controlling 2 of the other zones. Because if you're not controlling 2 of the other zones, odds are you're going to get shot up pretty good the moment you step out there, because that same amount of area that you can cover, that same area is also covering you. So you want to make sure that right after you take Zones 1 or Zone 2 or Zone 4, one of those locations, you start pushing out into that office space, and you can really help to ensure victory. Now, this last one's just a bit of a joke. It is, of course, the 4th zone. For the most part, controlling this zone is just making sure no one comes up or goes down those escalators. Now, you can push down those escalators as the Russians down into that space just below there, and by doing so, you can see on this map, you have a field of fire into Zone 3 as well as Zone 1, so you're essentially thinning out the herd of the reinforcements going into those areas. And that's huge, because if they're not getting as many reinforcements, they're a little bit weaker on the front lines, and it can actually help both those locations push forward. And like I said before, if you control 3 of the 4 zones, that 4th zone is completely surrounded, and eventually with just a little bit of pressure will fall entirely. And so those are the main areas that you need to focus on if you want to capture B. Some people think just push as hard as you can into lockers and you'll capture it. That's not the case, because I have seen far too often people will push all the way down, almost into the corner, the top corner before you leave the subway station on that side of the map. But it didn't matter, because there was still so much control around B. They never gained control of B, and ultimately they became surrounded in that tiny little sliver of the map. So you want to make sure you're controlling those 3 points. It doesn't matter what combination you run. So long as you control those 3 points, 3 of those 4 points, you're at an advantage at B flag, and you can help to take it or defend it. Now, this video was just dedicated to US attacking and the Russians defending. I'll put out another video, it'll be my next video, on the Russians are attacking B and the US is defending it. Again, what goes on in and around B is the most complicated part of Metro, and a lot of people don't seem to know what's going on because they have poor map awareness. They're just kind of paying attention to their one corner of the map, that tunnel vision, and so they don't realize there's a whole nother war going on around them. And I hope this video has been informative. The next video will, again, be informative, but for the Russian side. I'll be putting out a whole little series of these videos. The next one, of course, will still be about B, but then the next 2 will be about pushing back into the subway station from the Russian side, as well as pushing back up into the B flag from the US side, because once you get driven back to your first objective, it becomes increasingly difficult to push back to B. It's possible, but it's difficult. But those will be coming in later videos. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. I have a ton of information down in the description. Please go check that out. There's some channels you want to check out, a gaming community you want to check out. It's all good stuff down there. So please like, subscribe, share this video. I know a lot of you have friends. You play Metro, whether it's on Xbox or PC or PlayStation. You play Metro. It's like the flagship of Battlefield, as horrible as that is to say, because everyone likes to hate on it, but everyone also loves to play it. Share it with your friends. That way, next time you get together, you got a squad of 5 guys. In theory, you could make a difference if your squad of 5 guys is putting the right pressure on the right pressure points at the right time. You can help swing the tide of the war in Metro. Thanks for watching again, and I will see you on the battlefield.